Welcome to the Birth Words Podcast. This is episode number 17. In today's episode, we'll be taking another look at the complexities of communication and how our underlying beliefs and assumptions that we communicate interplay during birth.
You're listening to the Birth Words Podcast. Utah-based birth doula and applied linguistics scholar Sara digs into the language of pregnancy and birth to help expectant women claim their power as life-giving agents engaged in a praiseworthy work. This podcast aims to promote positive birth paradigms and is not intended as medical advice.
Welcome. We are going to talk a little bit more about how communication is complex. Of course, we're going to focus on the birth experience, and I am going to focus even more narrowly today, not just on the perinatal experience of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, but specifically in the birth space. What happens when we communicate? In episode 9, we talked about the complexities of conversation and about how when we speak, the words we say carry and reveal underlying beliefs and assumptions. If you didn't catch that episode, head on back to episode 9 now, check it out, and then join us back again here at this episode. This one is going to take that concept a little bit further. And so I mentioned during that episode that often, as a part of disempowering birth experiences, something that happens is that the beliefs or assumptions that are indirectly communicated clash between the birth giver and the caregiver, and also support people, family, whoever else is in the room. So today's episode, I'm going to take a look at some examples of places that has happened in birth stories that I've studied when they've coordinated and when they've clashed, these underlying beliefs and assumptions, and how that played out in the birth experiences. So these stories that I'm looking at just came from really common birth story repositories online, Baby Center, Parents, a few others. And I looked at these stories that were already publicly published and said, what's going on in these stories? Some of them have a really negative tone. Some of them have a really positive tone. Some of them seem like we kind of went back and forth. What's going on, and what role do the words spoken play in this? So as I looked at these birth stories, I looked at each time somebody was spoken, or it is inferred that somebody spoke because the mother writing the story is summarizing what was said. And I coded each utterance. Each time somebody spoke, I coded it for underlying belief. I said, what is this person indirectly communicating when they make this statement? And again, I gave some examples of that back in episode 9. So one thing that I noticed is that sometimes these beliefs don't align. They conflict. The birth giver is indirectly saying one thing, and a nurse or doctor or whoever's in the space is communicating through these underlying beliefs and assumptions another thing, and that can be negative for the birth giver. So here's an example. I'm going to read an excerpt from one of the birth stories, and then we'll look at each of the utterances and see what's being said and what was going on. So the author writes, I was immediately wheeled from the emergency room up to our birthing room. We got off to a poor start with the nurse. At the door, she told Lou he would have to go back down to registration to do some paperwork. Lou politely refused to be separated from me. We're not sure if the nurse read the birth plan in my chart. If she did, it didn't seem to matter to her. For example, she kept asking me questions while I was trying to relax through a contraction. Lou would answer, but she'd ignore him and ask me again. Still, we stayed focused on what we had to do. So you're probably recognizing, as I read that blurb, that they're not on the same page. So let's take a look at why not. So the nurse, she says, the nurse told Lou he would have to go back down to registration to do some paperwork. So in that paraphrasing of what was said, I hear that the nurse was positioning herself as an authority figure, and that the nurse was communicating the belief that birth is a medical condition. You're in a medical facility. We need to do some medical paperwork. Lou, though, it says, politely refused to be separated from me. And we don't know what words he said when he did that, but we can tell that the underlying belief that was communicated was that birth is a family or a social experience, and that the birth giver benefits from receiving support, and that they want to stay together during that experience, and that he was positioning himself as an authority figure. And as the author writes, this got them off to a bad start because they were communicating totally different things. They were positioning themselves both in authority and not recognizing the authority of the other. And they were communicating very different things about their beliefs about birth. The nurse that it's a medical condition, that we need to go through this paperwork, and the dad, Lou, communicating that this is a family experience, this is a social experience, and I need to be with my wife. So that created some tension. Let's keep looking at it. So the nurse, it says, kept asking me questions while I was trying to relax through a contraction. And again, here she's saying this is a medical condition. I have questions I need to ask. I'm an authority figure. And then it says that Lou would answer. And when he does that, he's communicating to the nurse indirectly that he believes that birth requires unique concentration, and that he has a position of authority in order to answer these questions as the support person for his wife. But she's not communicating on that same plane. She's not indicating that she has those beliefs. She's not operating under the same assumptions. She's not recognizing that her contractions are requiring a unique concentration, and she's continuing to ask questions, and she's not recognizing the authority of the support person to answer those questions. And then she continues, her response then is to ignore Lou, and ask me again. She's putting herself in a position of authority. She's also putting the birth giver in a position of authority as the only one who can answer these questions, but not recognizing that she's not in a place, since her contraction is requiring unique concentration, where she's wanting to be answering these questions. Interesting. There was more even in the blurb that we read that you could go back and look more at, but we're going to move on to a different example. This one, fortunately, shows an example of coordinating beliefs and how that was helpful and positive in the birth experience. So the author writes, let me give you a little background on this one. This is from a mother who has bad anxiety and is terrified of giving birth, and has decided instead to have a scheduled C-section, but goes into labor naturally prior to the scheduled C-section date, and is in the position where she's trying to decide if she can actually feel comfortable going through the process of labor, or if she's going to go to a C-section, because that was the plan all along and what she felt comfortable with before. So she writes, still, I refused to make a decision about C-section or vaginal birth until the epidural was placed and working, since I'd have one whether I ended up on an operating table or a delivery bed. The anesthesiologist placed the needle and had me roll over. Now, he said, as I settled onto my side, it may take 10 minutes for the pain to fully go away, but it was already gone. The on-call doctor had the C-section versus labor discussion with me, repeating what the nurses had said. Everything was going so well, he recommended I deliver vaginally, but he would still do a C-section if I wanted it. And because he said that, because he respected my wishes and put delivery decisions in my hands, I felt the final push of confidence needed to say, I think I can do a vaginal delivery. And there's a lot you can look at in this story. But let's take a look at a few things that were said. So the birth giver says, I refused to make a decision until the epidural was placed and working. And in that utterance, in whatever way she said it, she communicated the underlying beliefs that she was the authority figure, she was the one that was going to make a decision about this, and that she has needs and preferences and choices that should be respected. And then the anesthesiologist gives the epidural, says it may take 10 minutes for the pain to go away, indicating that medical interventions are helpful, And she's clearly having the same belief that medical interventions are helpful. She wasn't ready to make the decision until it was in place. And so they're on the same page with their underlying beliefs there. And it's very positive for the birth giver in this scenario because they're on the same page with their underlying beliefs. Then the on-call OB comes into the story and says he had the C-section versus labor discussion with me, repeating what the nurses had said. Everything was going so well, he recommended it. I deliver vaginally, but he would still do a C-section if I wanted it. And I think the thing that was the biggest for this birth giver, as she tells, is that he is recognizing that she has needs and preferences and choices. And with the way that he had this conversation, and again, we don't know exactly how he phrased it, but we know that the message that she got was that you have needs and preferences and choices. He positioned himself as a medical authority, giving his recommendation, indicating that interventions can be risky, but also showing his belief that the birth giver was strong and capable. But most of all, and most importantly to her, saying, you have needs and preferences and I will let you make the decision for your birth. And then she says, because he said that, I have the strength to say, I think I can do a vaginal delivery. Then also mirroring his belief that she is strong and capable, which she had not previously felt, but was able to, because their other beliefs were aligned, also adopt that belief that he had put forward, and that birth would be manageable, and that she was the one making these decisions and choices, and went on to have a positive vaginal birth when she was not anticipating that that would be the case for her. So she concludes her story saying that her positive experience was due to more than just a fast progression. She progressed pretty quickly after that. She says, the doctors and nurses who respected my choices played a huge part in my birth story. If my doctor had refused to schedule a C-section, I would have suffered 9 months of anxiety. If the L&D nurses had argued with my wishes instead of offering perspectives and options, I would have been frightened and angry while waiting for that epidural, and probably stuck with the C-section out of stubbornness. Obviously, medical concerns and safety must sometimes override our preferences, but my son's birth taught me to value a woman's choice about delivery whenever possible. I now fully support mothers who want a scheduled C-section, mothers who want to labor without medication, and all moms in between. And I hope others will too. And I really like that she took away from this story, not that this was the right choice and it is for all mothers and it is for all birth givers, but this was my story, and I was empowered by those who recognized that I had a position of authority to make decisions about my birth experience and to listen to others and their expertise, especially when they recognized her preferences and her needs. And her takeaway from that was that everyone should be given that same privilege of having a positive and empowering birth experience where they are heard and seen by those who are supporting and providing for them. So considering these two stories, considering your own experiences and those that you've heard about from others, I just want you to reflect that when we speak, our words indirectly carry underlying beliefs and assumptions. So birth givers, carefully consider your beliefs about birth and choose a care provider who aligns with them. That will help you feel supported. Those who are supporting birth givers who are listening to this, doulas, doctors, nurses, midwives, family members, other support people, listen to her when she speaks. Not just the words she says, but the underlying beliefs. Validate them, and when possible and helpful and safe, align with them. In an upcoming episode, we'll look into beliefs and frameworks that can be disempowering for the birth giver, and we can consider ways to work through them. But I hope this gives you some tools, whether you are preparing to give birth or whether you're supporting somebody who is, to think about our words and how we can show that we're really seeing and hearing others and working with them and supporting them. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Did words play an important role in your birth experience? If you're interested in sharing your story on the podcast, go to www.birthwords.com. If you're liking what you hear on the podcast, please leave a review on your podcast app. For more resources about harnessing the power of words to benefit the birth experience, visit birthwords.com.